difference. What to do with all our waste. We can make a difference by choosing smarter solutions over staying set in our ways. Global Ideas, the environmental series in Global 3000 on DW and online.
Well, Mother Nature's warnings are becoming increasingly drastic. What we used to call extreme events are suddenly the norm. Infernos in Western Canada with temperatures never before registered. We're shocked and we're horrified, but we always, it seems, manage to turn away. Devastating storm damage in Europe too, and more denial. So until the point we ask, climate catastrophe, will we ever change our ways? For joining us on the show. And with us in the studio is Petra Pitzler, author and journalist with the Hamburg-based weekly Die Zeit. She's convinced that we will change our ways and life will be better. Also with us is Claire Comfort from the German Institute for Economic Research. She argues that climate protection means freedom across the generations. A fossil-free life is not about going without, it's about living a full life. And a warm welcome too to Anjali Ramakrishna, who is with the Mercator Institute, also headquartered here in Berlin. And Anjali says, for the Global South, it's all about reconciling decarbonisation with justice and poverty alleviation. Okay, thank you very much for all three of you for being here today. I'd like to take the first question to Claudia. It's got to do with the United Nations, which is calling climate change the defining crisis of our time. Indeed, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says climate change, the climate emergency is a race we are currently losing. However, he insists it is a race we can win. Do you share his optimism?
Yeah, I share his optimism because we are now at a tipping point also in the discussions. We are at a tipping point related also to social participation on the topic. We have the Fridays for Future movement all over the globe. We have rulings, for example, in Germany from the General Court, but also in other countries. So we see step by step much faster action than before. And we have lost a lot of time with backward discussions the last 15 years, but now we have reached a tipping point where we can change, but we have to act now. We cannot postpone it to the future.
Fascinating insights. Great stuff to begin the show with that amount of information, optimistic information too. Petra, you wrote a book about how you and your family of 4 tried to adopt a carbon-neutral lifestyle. How did it go? What did you learn?
We didn't succeed.
You didn't succeed at all?
We didn't succeed.
You failed miserably.
We tried. The thing is, you try, you fail, you try again.
Yeah.
We didn't fail on all counts. What we did was actually happened out of frustration. We were very frustrated with the politicians that didn't really act on the facts that we all saw. Climate change is a fact. We feel it now. We feel it in Canada. We feel it in Germany. We feel it all over the world. So we tried to find out what we personally can do. And we went through a whole year and checked every account of our personal lives. So clothing, traveling, the food we eat, the way we live. And we lowered our CO2 emissions from all around 11 tons to 7, which is not actually really good because we need to go down to 2. But there are a couple of things that you can't change because you live in a society, you can't rebuild your house from scratch. But we were I think we're on a good way.
You said in your statement at the top of the show, we will live a better life. And the optimism that you two are sharing, and maybe you share it too, is fascinating to me. Where does that optimism come from?
Because I experienced it personally. My life is better now than it was before. For example, we had a car, we don't have a car now. We live in a city, so it's actually easier than when you live on somewhere in a remote area. But it took me about 2 or 3 months to automatically go from, when I go to work, to use the bike and not the car. So you need a certain time to really get used to the different way of life. And now I don't need to go to a sports studio any longer because I bike to work and I bike backwards. So I have the sport every day included in my life, which makes my life better.
Cool. Wonderful. Angeli, I know it's a big task, but try and give me a summary, if you can, of how this whole climate debate is impacting India.
I think it's pretty relevant in India as it is anywhere else in the world. And I think it's pretty, it's a very, very strong conversation that takes place. And I think it's also reflected in the sort of the pledge that India made in the Paris 2015 agreement. And it was achievable and it can go a bit further. But the thing is, what pulls back and what maybe restricts the extent to which India is able to sort of commit or be able to make the extra effort is other priorities that sort of India is right now needing to achieve, with a growing population, with economic growth. Not yet at its peak. It's got a lot of space where it's going to consume more, it's going to emit more, and the ideal sort of a sweet spot would be you're able to achieve that incremental growth or that incremental consumption, but not at the additional emission level that we'd hope.
The images we tend to see from India are fog and smog in Delhi, and it's pretty extreme stuff. You don't come from Delhi, do you?
I do. I wasn't born there, but I spent the majority of my adult life in Delhi, and I've seen it.
I haven't been to India for a couple of years, so
it's as bad as it seems. The weather, the air is foggy, the air is, it is hazy, it's not clear, it's, the news does not sort of give a false impression of how pathetic the situation is, and there have been efforts. It's not that people aren't doing anything, the government is not up to it. There are targets, there are objectives that are laid down, there are schemes, but it takes a little more than, I think it's a play. It's the demand side play as well as the supply side play, and I think that moving forward, I mean, we are not in a comfortable situation anymore. It's sort of getting to the red line where, we need to really act and we need to really put all gears in. And I think sort of we're still finding the sweet spot where we're able to levy a cost on the extra pollution that's been done, but at the same time not put consumers in a position where they can't live a happy life. So
I think it's a great example, Delhi. I remember that one of the German chancellors a long time ago made a campaign where he's actually said the sky above the Ruhr will shine blue again, and it's an area which is very industrialized with a lot of coal mining and coal plants there. And he actually made the plight: I want the people to have good air quality. So switching from coal to renewables is a good way to increase to give the people a better life.
I mean, I completely agree with you.
It's easy, huh?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, but I wish the answer was that easy.
Let me just interrupt on this complete agreement, because there's the three of you, and some of our viewers are going to watch this, and they're going to say, they've all got the same mindset here, all three of them, me too, probably, yeah? And that mindset is that climate change is a very real challenge. There are other people, though, around the world, and there are plenty of them who think it's all made up or it's all harmless. Claudia, what do you say to people like that, to the deniers, to the skeptics?
Well, it's not the science what those people refer to, because the scientific facts are clear, and since decades they're clear that the human-induced climate change is ongoing, and we already see that right now with the extreme weather events, for example in Canada with the heat wave, in Russia with burning forests, in Finland right now, and the climatologists tell us that's what we will face in the future much more often than we see right now. So there are scientific findings, and the skeptics are also driven by PR campaigns based also from the fossil fuel lobby, and there are scientific studies showing that they are fueling these PR campaigns in denying and merchants of doubt. So to see doubt is their business model, and we have to look to the facts. I'm a scientist, we are scientists, and so the scientific facts are really clear.
Even without believing in climate change, look at Delhi. To breathe good air in Delhi, even without believing in the fact of climate change, you want better air.
It's difficult to look the other way.
But I think,
in a place like Delhi.
Of course. I mean, it's definitely not easy to be going to work every day given the air that you're surrounded with. And I think the situation sort of, you could find examples of in London, in Singapore, where they've had congestion pricing, in Beijing, and I mean, there are solutions existing across the world where cities have faced, maybe to not the extent to which Delhi is facing, but sort of been there and, have efforts and policy measures that have been put in place. And I think it's a bit of both. You have someone who is saying that it's on the government. They are the ones who have to make the effort and make sure the right policies are put in place. We can't be changing our lifestyles or our routines. And where on the other side, it's, there is a little bit of a responsibility, and it falls on the consumers to make the right choice. There is the Delhi Metro. Cycling is particularly not an option, given it's not lane driving. You don't have bike lanes, but it's not something you can't think of. There are, from the metro station to the offices, you have bikes being provided. You have auto rickshaws. You have multiple modes of transport apart from private transport. But I think, there are many other systemic changes that needs to come up before we solely put the effort or the blame on just the government or just the consumer.
And you can combine all this. You can combine also with climate policy. Climate policy creates freedom for many countries, for the future generations. Climate policy also creates welfare also for all the people and increases welfare as well. And climate change is not a subject of belief. It's really a scientific fact. And as a scientist, I always have to say that it's not believing into something. It's not a religion. It's facts. It's science, and that's where we're all clear on. And climate policy helps a lot.
Let's look now at one example of how interconnected our environments, our habitats and our lives have become. And that example is the massive build-up of plastics in the world's oceans and rivers.
A vacuum cleaner is not enough to combat plastic waste on South Africa's beaches. Millions of tons of plastic particles are now deposited on beaches all over the world. The rivers are, in fact, the arteries of these countries that transport the waste from the cities. This also applies to the Nile in Egypt. Here, volunteers are also trying to stem the tide of plastic. The fishermen are directly affected. I see a lot of plastic. Plastic bottles and also cans. All of the trash is ruining my net, and at the same time, it's killing the fish. Piles of garbage are accelerating species extinction and climate change. Some materials take several hundred years to decompose and will probably never break down completely. Meanwhile, awareness is growing about the threat this poses to humanity. Recycling plants do exist, but they can only recycle a fraction of the waste produced. This is exacerbated by a throwaway society that has become accustomed to having its needs met everywhere, at any time, in convenient packaging. Should we learn to live without plastic?
Well, that's the question, Peter. I'd like to just put it a different way. We throw huge quantities of stuff, especially plastics, into our oceans and our rivers. What does that tell us about mankind, humankind?
It tells us that we have a problem that's much larger than climate change. The problem is the way we deal with the world. We think the world is just something we can consume. We don't have to get back, we don't have to preserve, and we can have ever more. And I think this is a misconception. To a certain extent, we have to kind of step back and think what we really need.
But for 18 months now, my newspapers have been reading that there's going to be a big rethink, a big reset because of the pandemic, and it's changed the way we think and the way we see the world, especially the climate issue. Is it happening? Is it going to happen?
Yeah, I think there are tendencies and showing that a lot of people think over whether this strategy of just always more and more and more and also harming the climate, harming the environment is not a great strategy, and we should move away. And now we are learning with video conferences, we are learning more cycling, but always, it's not only a matter of lifestyle, it's also a matter of transformation, which brings a lot of challenges, but brings also a lot of chances to all of us, but also to the industry and to the system itself, and a lot of new jobs. And system is
capitalism versus climate.
Yeah, so it's not versus, it's both together. So in the original form, the economy can do a lot, and the really classical socio-economics and ecological make it together in a certain way. Socio-ecological economics, say it that way, is an issue which we can do, but we have to price in the environmental damages, we have to price in also the climate damages, and we have to transform, and that brings a lot of challenges, but also huge economic chances.
And just let me throw two slogans out here.
Well, yes, they both are the right terminology right now, given the climate catastrophe. But speaking globally, I think that degrowth is something that needs a wider audience, needs a wider discussion, needs a wider platform. And right now, it's
So it hasn't happened yet.
No, definitely not. It hasn't happened yet, and we're still looking. I think we're still sort of mulling over it. There is a huge class of scientists, political scientists that have considered going forward with it in terms of research, but the real implementation of it, I don't see the politics, the leaders picking it up to the extent that it needs to. But if you look at the global south, where we've not, our trajectory is right now still upwards, we've not peaked, we've not reached the position in terms of standard of living, in terms of well-being, in terms of growth, where we can look at a degrowth. But you still have China and India giving carbon neutral targets by 2050, 2060, despite the fact that it was only less than two decades ago that we had a real chance at reaching the growth.
Yeah.
But I mean, having said that, I also think what Claudia said is it's not capitalism or climate, and I think it's sort of working hand in hand, because to be able to address the climate issues, we need money, and we have fossil fuel industries which have the money. So we cannot be working towards solutions by putting them down and be like, we need the oil under the ground, beneath the ground. Yes, we need, but we can't isolate them in our fight. And I think it has to be sort of a play together, and how to best find the solution to be able to say harness, if it's renewable energy, if it's alternative pricing, if it's carbon pricing. We need the other players on board as well. So
we're here in
the dirty things need to degrow, but the good things need to grow, and that's the fundamental issue here. I completely agree with what you said.
This is why capitalism could kick in a good way. It's financial markets now more and more leading the change, because you don't want to have stranded assets. You don't want to put your money into a coal mine these days, because you don't know whether in 20 years it will be still able to be run.
But who's going to bear the cost of stranded assets? Do the governments right now in the developing nations have the willingness and the financial strength to be able to bear the cost of stranded assets when they have other development and national priorities come into play? So I think that the fact that there is still a lot of pledges, a lot of targets that are given by the leaders in the global south is enough to say there is an intention, but there has to be a tech transfer, there has to be a financial support coming at the same time to be able to make those policies a reality.
Well, in the battle to keep the global warming below 2 degrees, we've touched on this already, we must slash global emissions of carbon dioxide by about 45% before 2030, quite soon. So that is all with the aim of reaching zero net emissions by 2050. The big question is how?
10 years ago, shortly after the reactor accident in Fukushima, Japan, the German government decided to take all German nuclear power plants off the grid and switch primarily to renewable energy sources. German nuclear power will be phased out in 2022. But the dismantling process is a difficult one. The fuel rods need to be cooled for years to come, and some radioactive substances will have to be stored safely for thousands of years. At this point in time, there are only interim storage facilities. Other countries are pushing for a revival of the controversial technology. After numerous accidents in old American nuclear power plants, the Biden administration plans to build smaller modern plants. France, Russia, and China in particular also want to use nuclear power to satisfy part of their enormous energy needs. The advantage, unlike combustible substances like coal, natural gas, or oil, nuclear power plants are largely CO2 neutral and therefore more climate friendly, at least from this particular point of view. Do we need nuclear power to stop global warming?
Sorry, Claudia, but I think it's the closest low carbon option next to renewables in terms of providing access to everyone. And yes, there are a lot of reservations. There is a cost associated with it. There is high risk, but I think that there is a very
resilience, and the potentials are always neglected and ignored simply by these PR campaigns. And India has so large potential. So
there's one more argument. I would say nuclear is just not quick enough to build all these power plants. You need time, and we need to fight climate change right.
30 years.
Yeah. So you can put solar everywhere. In the remote areas in Africa, solar can be the solution. Wind energy is the technology is very easy. So you can put them wherever we need them. And with nuclear, it's the other way around. It's not quick, it's expensive, and no country has yet managed to deal with the leftovers.
Just one question, Petra. We need the perspective of the younger generation, and I was thinking I read about your son who complained to you. He got annoyed with him because he said that you come from a generation that has travelled the world and enjoyed doing so, and we now have completely different expectations about what I presume is his generation.
I think that this is where the question of justice kicks in. It kicks in between the generations, and it kicks in between the North and the Global South. And there is a huge issue that we haven't solved yet. It's not the South that has to go forward, it's the North. It's our generation and not the young generation. Because we need to let something over. They need to have the possibility to inherit something from this world. And I think it's absolutely right.
I'm optimistic. The Guardian newspaper only recently had a big headline saying we've had 6 decades of these warnings. We haven't heeded them.
We haven't felt the issue. Now we feel it. We feel it in Germany, we feel it in Canada, we feel it everywhere. And I would say mankind is able to react quickly when the problem is there.
there's one strong argument, what I just said also in the beginning. We are at a tipping point because of the civil society. And here's the difference also in the picture what we see right now. The civil society has changed, and this is what we see in the rulings of the federal courts, also Germany and the Netherlands and the US, everywhere. The civil society and it is pushing for change because we all fear that there is a lost future, and we should change right now. And I think there is a tipping point now.
I agree that there is the Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y that is sort of questioning why is it that we have to push back our wants and desires to travel, to consume a little more. But I think that at the same time there is a lot of awareness in the generation on what we're going to be heading towards, and is this the life that we want for ourselves in the next 40, 50 years? I think a lot of information and understanding has sort of trickled down to schools, into syllabuses, into putting into the matter that they read at school. So there is going to be a bit of pushback because you're essentially limiting the periphery of how much can you really want to go out. But I think the generation is a lot more aware before they take their choice, they take their options. You have a lot of this younger generation, or maybe the 20s and the 30s, who have accepted to make the change in terms of the transport that they use, in terms of the diet they have, in terms of how much do they consume, what kind of housing, where are they going to live, how much do they travel in a year. And I mean, a lot of it has, to my experience so far, been a European experience for me. And in India, there isn't enough to sort of complain, because it's not like it's beyond control that every month someone's outside. So I wouldn't say that there is so much of a pushback from the generation. I think there's a lot of acceptance. It's going to take a change. There is a bit of sort of a nuance that we've come so far. Yes, 60 years, nothing's happened, but are we waiting for it to reach an adverse situation to act?
Something is going to happen in this country in the next couple of months, where we have a general election, a watershed election, I would suggest, at the end of September. Half a minute from each of you. What advice would you give to the incoming German government on the climate issue?
To go forwards quickly, because there's lots of markets for the German industry. If we now switch into green economy, if we are able to provide green products.
And debate. We really need an honest debate about the chances, but also about the transformation. Not only determined goals, that's good, they all confirm, but we need measures to go there. And here there's some kind of dishonesty in the debate.
They can do better with the carbon pricing.
That's one issue.
I mean, yes, it's still an unmet.
In concrete terms, tell me what exactly you mean. I know we've got very little time, but when you say